of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Farmers kick off a week of protest against the government as the Prime Minister stands by his budget.
Make no mistake, I will defend our decisions in the budget all day long.
He had an opportunity to come out and address the crowd. You know, even if he was booed, he should have been man enough to come out here and talk to the people.
As Joe Biden has his last meeting with China's President Xi Jinping, questions about what Donald Trump's return to the White House will mean for U.S.-China relations. The cost of junk food to the nation's health. A report says it's more than the whole NHS budget. Plus, fight or farce? Questions over celebrity boxing bouts after 58-year-old Mike Tyson loses to a man less than half his age. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. Farmers descended on the Welsh Labour Conference today as their fight with the government over changes to inheritance tax begins to ramp up. Sir Keir Starmer didn't confront them directly. Instead, he gave his message from the stage, saying he stood by the decisions made in last month's budget. But the row is only set to intensify, with farmers preparing to take their protests to Westminster next week. Sky's Lisa Dowd reports now from Llandudno.
They swapped the fields for the seafront of Llandudno to try to drive their point home. The North Wales town was hosting not only the Welsh Labour Conference, but also the Prime Minister. And hundreds of farmers wanted him to know just how upset they are about changes to inheritance tax.
Just want fair play for the farmers. Everything we're doing, it is for our kids. It's their future. And everything is just going against us. This inheritance tax it's ridiculous. It's a final straw.
I'm just so emotional. Why do we as farmers have to do this? We shouldn't,
This government needs to realise it's never been hungry since World War II. They're going to be hungry because if they keep putting tax on the farmers, it's going to have a massive impact.
From 2026, farmers will be liable for inheritance tax at 20% on farms worth more than £1 million. They claim it will force many to sell up to pay the bill. In a country where 90% of land is farmed, Keir Starmer made no mention of them today.
Make no mistake, I will defend our decisions in the budget all day long. I will defend facing up to the harsh light of fiscal reality. I will defend the tough decisions that were necessary to stabilise our economy. And I will defend protecting the payslips of working people.
Organisers of the protest said the Prime Minister had been disrespectful.
It's so frustrating that he's run out the back door like a flipping rat. People here have come here to talk to him. They've come here to address their frustrations, and he didn't even have the guts to come and just address them.
The government claims that only a small number of farms would be affected. Their figures are wrong, according to protesters here. Farmers say this is just the start. Next week, they are planning to hold their first ever strike action, and tens of thousands of them are going to be protesting in London on Tuesday. Farmers will be withholding meat and crops from supermarkets in the days ahead, and say that if they're not listened to, there will be more action to come. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, North Wales.
Our political correspondent Nick Martin joins us now from Westminster. Nick, more protests planned next week, as we were hearing, but the Prime Minister seemingly in no mood to U-turn.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's clear from what we've just seen that there was a lot of anger and frustration that Prime Minister didn't engage with farmers and their families in Wales today. But I think, in fairness, it's perhaps no surprise. All governments face protests all the time. You just have to walk around Westminster, especially at the weekend, and you'll see protests outside of Downing Street, outside the House of Commons. But you generally don't see Prime Ministers coming out and engaging with them. So I think that was always going to be very unlikely. What the Prime Minister was in Wales today to do was to talk to the conference, the Welsh Labour Conference, to try and remind party faithful of why they were elected. And I think over the last few weeks, the government have made some very difficult decisions. We saw that played out in the budget, not just the inheritance tax for farmers, but national insurance for employers and freezing of tax thresholds. But I do think over the last 24 hours in particular, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have tried to sort of re-engage with the message about inheritance tax over farmers, trying to get the message across that if you're a farming couple and you want to try and pass on that farm to your family, then the threshold, they would say, is actually higher, beyond £3 million, which is why we're hearing the government say that the majority of farmers won't be stung for this extra 20%. But I think somewhere down the line between the budget and today, that messaging has got lost. The government continue to say that they have very difficult decisions to make. They continue to say that they have a £22+ billion black hole in the economy, which is why the thrust of what the Prime Minister said today was a one of defiance, that he stands by the decisions in the budget, including the inheritance decision for farmers. But I think going forward, we're going to see farmers come to central London next Tuesday to continue those protests. And I'm not sure that the government's messaging is perhaps getting through to farmers. Perhaps they don't want to hear it, perhaps they don't believe the government. But I do think it's a particular problem for the government. This is one bit of the budget that's continuing to persist, and we're going to see more protests next week. But the main message from Keir Starmer is that they are holding firm because they've got very difficult decisions to make. But I'm just not sure whether that message is quite landing.
Nick Martin in Westminster for us. Nick, thank you. There's a new development tonight in the row that has engulfed the Church of England and led to the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Bishop of Newcastle, Dr. Helen Ann Hartley, has alleged some bishops are choosing not to call out senior Church of England leadership because of a culture of silence and fear among bishops, and because they're thinking about their own promotion prospects. She's been speaking to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Here is some of what she told us.
Silence speaks in many ways. Some are silent perhaps because they see themselves as succeeding to be the new Archbishop of Canterbury. Others are fearful of being reprimanded and rebuked, because I know that colleagues have received letters similar to mine which are quite heavy in tone. So I think genuinely they're motivated by a fear of just keeping their heads down and not feeling able to speak out, which I think is really unfortunate.
Well, we approached the Church of England for a comment on that interview, but they said they had nothing further to add. And you can watch the full interview tomorrow from 8:30 on Sky News. Trevor Phillips will also be joined by Transport Secretary Louise Haigh, Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, and President of the National Farmers Union, Tom Bradshaw. That's Sunday morning with Trevor Phillips tomorrow from 8:30 a.m. US President Joe Biden has met his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping at an economic summit in Peru this evening in what is expected to be their final encounter before Mr. Biden leaves the White House. And with an eye on the man set to replace him, President Xi today warned about the dangers of protectionism. Our security and defense editor, Deborah Haynes, joins us now from Rio. That's where the G20 meeting is taking place in the coming days. So, Deborah, Xi and Biden meeting tonight. What did they discuss? And crucially, did the shadow of Donald Trump loom large?
Well, yes, it most certainly did. The two men were pictured shaking hands, exchanging greetings in Peru before they went in for their meeting. President Biden made some comments to the media talking about the long relationship that he's had with his Chinese opposite number as president, and then previously under the Obama administration before Donald Trump as vice president, talking about how the two men have spent a lot of hours discussing various different things and making this pointed comment about how communication between these two superpowers can prevent miscalculation, which could veer towards conflict. And President Xi, he gave some remarks as well to the media before they went into their meeting, again reinforcing about the dialogue. He said that the relationship between China and the United States during Joe Biden's time in office, they've had fruitful dialogue. The relationship has had its ups and downs, he said, but he then described it as stable. And then he did make remarks throwing forward to how he would like to see China-US relations debates continue under a Donald Trump presidency, saying that China is ready to work with the new US administration to maintain communication, expand cooperation and manage differences so as to strive for a steady transition of the China-US relationship for the benefit of the two peoples. Clearly, though, both sides know that the new administration will take a much tougher line on China, and there are the potential, therefore, for conflict potentially between the two sides looming even larger.
It definitely does. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, with the latest there from Rio, where that G20 meeting will take place. Deborah, thank you. Well, our Asia correspondent Nicole Johnston has been taking a closer look at how the US-China relationship could change with Donald Trump back in the White House.
The roar of ambition, China's military prowess, plain to see in the skies above Zhuhai. It can now challenge its geopolitical rival, the United States, in everything from trade to tech. Enter unpredictable President-elect Donald Trump. He's talking about slapping tariffs on his rival, could be up to 60%.
We can do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. China doesn't have what we have. Nobody has what we have.
But China does have this, a growing fleet of stealth fighter jets. And not even a downpour could keep the crowds away.
For China, all of this is designed to impress that it aims to have the strongest military and economy in the world, that it has the power to challenge the US-led global order, regardless of who is in the White House.
It is impressive, no doubt. China's latest unmanned combat drone, it can travel almost 7,000 miles, carrying out strikes over a vast distance.
China's position in the world speaks for itself. The air show is an embodiment of our military strength. I'm proud of my country.
Another tricky topic for Trump to tackle is Russia. It sent its aerobatic team to Zhuhai, and its former defense minister, Sergei Shoigu.
What does it say about the relationship between China and Russia?
Both sides are looking for the communication, for good communication in many, in business, in aviation, in many spheres, also in tourism.
As for defense, the US has sanctioned a Chinese company, accusing it of sending engines for Russia's battlefield drones. China insists it is not giving Russia weapons. But the optics look bad. And on top of all that, it knows Trump has a trade war with China in his sights. Back in Beijing, the impact is being weighed up.
I think both sides have recognized that the era of making deals has passed. What we're going to see China doing is to start with a little bit of targeted measures. So, some areas of tariffs where it feels more comfortable to impose. That could be the starting point. But there is also areas that China is also starting to be a bit more aggressive.
And with that comes a great deal of posturing. China says it wants peace, but it may be preparing for the worst. Nicole Johnston, Sky News, Zhuhai in southern China.
Let's stay with Donald Trump, and tonight he has made the latest appointment to his administration. He's announced an oil and gas industry executive, Chris Wright, as his choice to lead the U.S. Department of Energy. The founder and CEO of Liberty Energy is a defender of fossil fuel use and development, including fracking. The long-running public debate over free speech has erupted once again after police went to the home of a journalist and told her that she was being investigated for alleged incitement of racial hatred over a year-old tweet. Alison Pearson, who writes for the Daily Telegraph, said that she was left dumbfounded and upset. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch said that people need to stop wasting police time over what she called trivial incidents. But the police say if an alleged crime is reported, it is investigated. Here's our communities correspondent, Lisa Holland.
Another busy weekend for policing. In London, climate protests amongst the demands on resources. Now the leader of the opposition is questioning whether investigating online opinions is the right use of police time and has called on the Prime Minister to review hate crime laws. Speaking to The Telegraph, Kemi Badenoch said, "We need to stop this behaviour of people wasting police time on trivial incidents because they don't like something, as if they're in a nursery. It's like children reporting each other. And I think that in certain cases the police do it because they're afraid that if they don't do it, they will also be accused of not taking these issues seriously." Kemi Badenoch waded in after a visit to the home of journalist Alison Pearson by Essex Police last weekend. This is the Telegraph columnist's X account, now devoid of a controversial tweet from a year ago, which has led to police now investigating whether she's committed the criminal offence of inciting racial hatred. Alison Pearson has called the police visit frightening nonsense.
We know that policing is under-resourced and that they are unable to attend often quite serious crimes. This was the most extraordinary overreach and state intrusion into my private life, and I don't think I did anything wrong, and I think their response was outrageous.
Alison Pearson said she wasn't told which post the police were investigating, but has suggested it could be related to protests which followed Hamas's attacks on Israel last October. Essex Police say they were following procedures. In a statement they said, "We police without fear or favour, and that's why we respond to alleged offences which are reported to us by members of the public." For clarity, a complaint of a possible criminal offence was made to the police, and this is why we called to arrange an interview.
They have said that they believe it's past the threshold. It appears from their statement that they're saying it is a hate crime, and therefore they need to investigate it in whichever way they think is appropriate. My plea really is that police forces and the Home Office need to give much clearer guidance to chief constables, supported by police and crime commissioners, to make sure that the police are using their time wisely.
Britain loves a debate, but the argument now is whether Parliament needs to make the line between expression and incitement clearer. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
10 newborn babies have been killed in a hospital fire in northern India. 16 others were also injured in the blaze at an intensive care neonatal unit in Uttar Pradesh state. Officials say it is not immediately clear why the fire started, and an investigation is underway. 8 people have been killed and 17 others injured in a stabbing attack at a vocational school in the city of Wuxi in eastern China. Police say the suspect, a 21-year-old male student, was detained at the scene. Officers say he had failed his exams and was frustrated he had failed to graduate. A woman whose body was found in the boot of a car in Ilford in East London has been named as Harshita Brella. A post-mortem examination has established that the 24-year-old, who's from Corby in Northamptonshire, has been murdered. Schools across the country are reporting a rise in the number of students coming to class with poor personal hygiene. A charity survey has found 40% of teachers now say they have personally washed the uniforms of pupils so they won't have to go to school in dirty clothes. Sky's Anjum Pirbakos has been to a school in Blackpool that has installed a washing machine to cope with the problem.
An increased number of schools say they're having to deal with another crisis. Families struggling to keep their kids clean, including their school uniforms. So teachers are having to find ways to help them.
They said it was like a choice between that and electricity. We've had some families that maybe couldn't afford washing powder at that particular time, that particular week, or we've had some that say, oh, I don't get paid till Friday and their uniform's dirty. Is there any chance that we could just do one wash?
Among the most common things pupils experience in hygiene poverty include unclean uniform or PE kit, unwashed hair or unclean teeth, and having head lice several times throughout the year.
He's a bit of a messy eater, as you can see. He suffers from nosebleeds quite a lot. So it's just, you can see the food that he's had on the Friday, really, and possibly even on the Thursday as well. He feels more comfortable in it. It's a calming influence for him. He can be quite an agitated boy. He comes in, he has a fresh, we call it Fresh Friday, what we used to do when we changed his socks. So we had a thing every Friday. We come and clean your feet. You used to have a little bucket and he used to wash his feet in where you put fresh socks on. It's an increase in every year. There's something extra that teachers are doing.
And is there any kind of responsibility taken by mum or carer that actually that should be done, you know, at home?
She doesn't really acknowledge it as such. She would just say, oh, that's great, thanks.
80% of teachers surveyed have seen an increase in hygiene poverty in their school. Almost 9 in 10 state school staff say they or another colleague have personally supported a pupil in hygiene poverty, with 40% of teachers personally washing pupils' uniforms.
I never thought that I would need a laundrette in our school, and unfortunately that's just the nature of the state of affairs for our families. Families find it incredibly difficult to heat their houses, to provide food for their children and to wash clothes. It's just part and parcel of what happens now.
The government have set up a child poverty task force which will look at child poverty as a whole. Meanwhile, it seems that teachers are taking on yet another responsibility, and washing cycles continue to spin in our schools. Anjum Bakos, Sky News.
The cost to the UK of chronic disease brought on by unhealthy food amounts to £268 billion every year. Now, that's higher than the entire annual budget of the NHS. And that figure comes from a new report from the University of Surrey. It combines the cost of healthcare, welfare spending and productivity losses, and has led to some to question our consumption of ultra-processed food, which is the highest in the Western world behind the US. Here's our North of England correspondent, Charlotte Leeming.
At this market in West Yorkshire, there's plenty of fresh food on offer. But a new report suggests people are increasingly turning to fast food, which is costing the UK when it comes to health and finances.
We are a society in distress, and we're living with an increasing burden of chronic disease. That chronic disease has a devastating impact on our health, and it's undermining our national finances. And when you look at it from the point of view of, what to do about it, the answer is pretty clear. It's all lies in prevention.
The report found food-related chronic disease is costing the UK £268 billion per year. That number far exceeds the £181 billion spent on the NHS this year. Ultra-processed food, which researchers say can cause chronic illnesses, currently makes up more than half of the British diet.
The government has diet guidelines it suggests people follow for a healthy lifestyle. It says people should cut down on processed foods and snacks and to eat more fruit, fibre and vegetables. But this report says if people follow those guidelines that it could cost households an extra £38 every week.
Food is something we can't do without, is it? So, if we can make things healthier and more accessible to people, we'd have more money in the NHS.
Because we have a little one, we're trying to give him good food, but then it's expensive, isn't it?
David Gibbons' family have run this fruit and veg stall for over 40 years, and he says money is tighter than ever.
Good fruit and veg, it can be expensive. And the processed stuff is too readily available, isn't it? I was talking to a lady this morning who says it's cheaper for her to go buy a little microwave meal out of one of the supermarkets than it is to make, a nice meal.
The government's pledged to tackle diet-related illness. It's banning junk food TV adverts before 9 p.m. and energy drink sales to under 16s. There are also calls for manufacturers to offer healthier options and a tighter regulation of the food industry. Because as it stands, a healthy diet is costing people time and money they simply don't have. Charlotte Leeming, Sky News, Otley in West Yorkshire.
Let's bring you the latest pictures we have received of President Biden meeting President Xi of China. Now, the two leaders are meeting in Peru for the talks of the annual Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit that's taking place there. The last scheduled meeting between the two leaders, lots of topics to talk about. Let's listen to what President Biden has been saying.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. It's good to see you and see all of you again. You know, 1 year ago, we met in the Woodside Summit in San Francisco, and I'm very proud of the progress we both made together. Our military communication at multiple levels, our leaders are now regularly talking to one another on a regular basis. On AI, we have brought together our nation's experts together to discuss risks and safety. Our counter-narcotics, on that issue, we resumed cooperation, and I want to note, in my country, Mr. President, overdose deaths are coming down for the first time in 5 years. We have a lot to discuss, but let me close with this. For over a decade, you and I have spent many hours together, both here and in China and in between. And, you know, I think we spent a long time dealing with these issues. Let me close with this. I think I once had to count up the number of hours you and I spent alone together. I remember being on the Tibetan Plateau with you, and I remember being in Beijing, I remember all over the world. And both as first as vice president, then as president. We haven't always agreed, but our conversations have always been candid and always been frank. We have never kidded one another. We've been level with one another. I think that's vital. These conversations prevent miscalculations, and they ensure the competition between our two countries will not veer into conflict. Be competition, not conflict. That's our responsibility to our people, and as you indicated, to the people around the world. We are the most important alliance or most important relationship in the entire world. And how we get along together is going to impact the rest of the world. And so, you know, our two countries cannot let any of this competition veer into conflict. And as I say, that's our responsibility. And over the last 4 years, I think we've proven it's possible to have this relationship. And so, Mr. President, I'm anxious to get our meeting started and discuss the issues we have remaining. Thank you.
Mr. President, are you concerned about U.S.-China relations under the incoming Trump administration?
We were listening there to President Biden at the last meeting, scheduled meeting anyway, that he is going to have with the president of China before Donald Trump takes over at the White House. Now, Mike Tyson has lost a unanimous points decision to YouTuber Jake Paul in his first professional boxing fight in 19 years. The 58-year-old former heavyweight champion of the world went the distance in one of the most controversial fights in boxing history, with boos heard in the crowd as the bout came to a limp conclusion. Our sports presenter Jackie Beltrao reports.
Full hydraulic lowrider
making an entrance to the fight of the ages. Mike Tyson has been in his fair share of controversial bouts, but none perhaps as crazy as this. Taking up the challenge of YouTube influencer turned boxer Jake Paul, a man young enough to be his son. He may be 58, but the ring walk of the two-time heavyweight legend was the same. No frills, black shorts, intimidating. It's 19 years since Tyson's last professional fight, but he can still pack an arena. 80,000 in the Arlington Stadium, Texas, millions watching on Netflix. The allure of the baddest man on the planet is still there.
Fighter. His dad broke down in tears.
From the off, Tyson was out of the blocks, showing that age might not be a stumbling block after all.
He just landed the overhand right.
But as the fight went on, the fatigue set in for Tyson, and Paul was on the attack, landing punches and wobbling the man who'd made his pro debut nearly 40 years ago. Into the final quarter, Tyson knew it was now or never, but the legs were tired and the punches came to nothing. And by the 8th round, a sign of respect from the youngster to the former heavyweight champion, after 16 minutes of hard fighting.
Lasted 49 seconds. This one goes 16 minutes.
The old warrior went the distance, took the punches, but it wasn't enough, with Jake Paul crowned the winner on points.
Your winner by unanimous decision, Jake
It's just an honor to be able to fight him, and he's obviously the toughest, baddest man on the planet, so it was really tough, like I expected it to be.
But both walk away with millions of dollars, and for Paul, the kudos of beating a legend of the sport 2 years short of his 60th birthday. Jackie Beltrao, Sky News.
Let's get all the rest of the day's sport from Sky Sports News and Dallas.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Firstly, how do you reflect on the decision that England made to retire you effectively earlier on this year?
Yeah, obviously I've made peace with it now. A lot of time's passed, but it was tough at the time. I was coming into that summer thinking I still had a lot to give, a lot to offer the team. I still felt I was fit and playing well. So when it did come as quite a shock at first, but I feel like I'm the sort of person that probably would have kept playing until I was 50 if I possibly could. So if they want to look ahead to the future, which I'm obviously fine with, and it was nice that they wanted to keep me around the team as well, and I've enjoyed being part of the setup in a slightly different role.
And you asked if you could play one final test at Old Trafford. Is there a disappointment that you weren't able to do that?
No, not really. I think, again, a lot of time's passed since that my last test match, so I was delighted that I got to play at Lord's. I don't think a lot of people get that opportunity sometimes to go out like that and have that one last moment, and to have the crowd and the team around me and my family there as well, I think was just a great week and a great way to go out.
And as difficult as it was, when you consider the development of Gus Atkinson and Bryden Carson in Pakistan in particular, not that England were vindicated the decision, but have they been able to make strides since then?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been great to watch the guys come in and get opportunities and take those opportunities. The two guys you mentioned there, Gus Atkinson and Bryden Carson, I think have been standouts. But there's other guys as well, so many on the periphery, especially in the bowling group, that are really knocking on the door for a spot in that Ashes squad in a year's time.
And having won the Ashes Down Under, do you think this squad is moving in the right direction? There's been bumps along the road. There's been some brilliant success over the last 2 years as well. But to go down under and really feel like you can be victorious.
Yeah, I think we've got a really exciting squad. I think the batting group is really strong. We've seen some, one of the best opening partnerships we've ever had has formed in the last year or so, with Ben Duckett and Zach Crawley, and then we've got the quality of Ollie Pope, who's captained the side recently, Joe Root, Harry Brook, who I think is going to be a phenomenal player, and the captain Ben Stokes at 6. So it feels like that's strong. And as I said, the bowling group, I think there's enough there, enough variation for the conditions we're going to come up against in Australia to do well.
You speak in your book about having hot wings with Joe Root at 5:30 in the morning, in the hours that followed your final test match.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with writer and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner and broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Welcome both. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, the Sunday Times claims that the government is planning to strike Italy-style deals with several countries to help them stop thousands of illegal immigrants setting off to try to get to the UK. The Mail on Sunday tears into the Prime Minister by revealing that the UK has sent 470 delegates to the COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan. The headline, call that net zero, Sir Keir. The Observer leads with a report which has found what the paper calls a shocking increase in the number of vulnerable children deprived of their liberty by the state, with many being kept in illegal accommodation at a high cost to the taxpayer. The Telegraph, which has been following the story all week, reveals that another writer was visited at home by police after claims that one of her old tweets was a hate crime. It follows the case we're reporting tonight of Telegraph journalist Alison Pearson. The Express claims an exclusive with a prediction that OAPs will die in the coming cold weather because they can't get the help they need to claim the winter fuel allowance that they're still entitled to. Plenty of money for buses, though. That's according to the Mirror, which says Labour is to invest £1 billion to bring London-style bus services to the whole country. The Sunday People reports that a former BBC EastEnders star is now so broke that she's forced to use a food bank. And finally, the Star says scientists have identified a new and painful medical condition suffered by social media addicts who use their phones for a long time while sitting on the toilet. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Amy Nicole-Turner and Lucy Beresford. Thank you for joining us to go through the papers. Let's go straight away to a story that we were just mentioning there, and that's the Express. The front page, quite a stark headline, OAPs will die as the big freeze hits. Now, this, I mean, obviously a lot of people have said that the issue around the winter fuel allowance that's been taken away from so many will have an impact, but this is slightly more complicated than that. Amy, talk us through it.
So, yeah, it's a calm and collected response from the Express, as we've come to expect. They've got an exclusive here. This is actually about the deadline in applying for pension credit. It's quite a complicated procedure, and a lot of pensioners haven't applied for pension credit, which would enable them to receive the winter fuel allowance. So the fear is that people are going to suffer because they're not claiming what they're eligible for. And the Express has concluded that OAPs will die. Now, I think that might be a little bit dramatic, but it is certainly the case that it can be tricky to put your application. But I do think it would have been useful of the Express to put the deadline on here. It's the 21st of December, by the way. So if anyone is feeling fearful from seeing a headline like this, which would be understandable, you have got a while to still apply for that. And you can rest assured, because the budget was quite kind to pensioners, the triple lock, pensioners are getting support. Despite what the Express is leading us.
I mean, the other thing that's happening that we're expecting in the next few days is a cold snap. So we're going to get the first proper...
That's why this is such an emotional headline, really. And actually, inside the Express, it does actually have that date. But the problem is that the form has like 240 questions. And if you are an elderly pensioner, if you're, it's not just someone who's necessarily just become a pensioner, let's say in their mid-60s, it could be someone 20 years older than that. It's a really complicated form to really get to grips with. And there are a lot of Labour MPs who are coming out and saying this has been rushed, it's affecting our constituents, and that's, putting us in peril, potentially. But I think, when you've got a cold snap arriving within the next 24 hours, if the weather forecasters are to be believed, and of course the ones on Sky, we do believe them, actually this is saying there could be people who will be very severely affected. And we know already that pensioners, they go without heating, they go without eating, they are our most vulnerable. And this is a very emotive headline trying to get the government to reverse its action.
And again, so many of them are alone and so hard for people to check in. Let's look at another story, again, sort of looking at some of the government's measures. Express, page 6, Labour won't win again after betraying farmers. Now, this is the issue from the budget and inheritance tax. A lot of farmers are very angry and planning, events for the coming week as well. Lucy, again, if you could just talk us through what this particular angle is.
Yes, it's a really interesting story because it's following on from the budget and one of the measures, which was around altering the inheritance tax rules specifically for farmers and farming families. And what had happened hitherto was that if you had a farm, that actually you could leave it to your family without them incurring inheritance tax. And I feel very conflicted about inheritance tax because it is fundamentally the only tax you pay when you're grieving, because somebody has just died. And also it's something usually on assets that in some shape or form have already been taxed. So what you've got is you've had farmers who have decided to cause some disruption at the conference in Llandudno in Wales. They're also talking about disruption in London on Tuesday, perhaps Whitehall will see tractors.
A full week is expected.
Yes, although I'm not sure whether they're doing it just in person or whether they're online activity as well. But basically what they're saying is this doesn't really... Not only is it about the individuals, but it could actually impact food security for Britain in terms of what happens to those farms. If those farms, because what we're talking about is families who are very asset rich, but they're cash poor. So you inherit this farm, but you can't pay the 20% inheritance tax unless you sell the farm. So who are you going to sell the farm to?
But that's not exactly the case, because...
But that's exactly what farmers are saying.
The farm has to be valued, the business has to be valued at $1 million, and that doesn't include the farmhouse. If there's two people, it can go up to $2 million. And previously...
But it's still an asset, and if you're trying to pay a tax bill the tax bill is
how are you going to get that cash? The tax bill is interest-free, and it's also over the space of 10 years, and it's also 20% as opposed to 40%, which every other business will pay. So the farmers had a really good deal for a lot of years, and I think that's why this loophole was abused completely by people buying up land to avoid inheritance tax, not even using it as a farm, and those people have created this problem.
But this is what it's actually the farmers who are saying. But yes, there may have been other people like maybe Sir James Tyson or Jeremy Clarkson who bought up lots of land in order to offset other tax issues. But right now we're talking about some really struggling people who, as I say, they haven't got the money, they've got the asset, but they haven't got the cash.
We need to move on, but just worth saying, I mean, the government has always been saying that they have difficult decisions to make, and the budget was, full of those difficult decisions. And the headline here is the president of the Countryside Alliance effectively saying they're not going to win again at the polls.
Well, the problem is, because Labour's got such a large majority, fully 1 in 4 Labour MPs is now in a rural constituency, so it could come back to bite them.
Obviously,
but the Conservatives were treating farmers horrendously in the last Parliament, so it's kind of ironic to see them standing up now and criticising Labour for this, when they cut subsidies. Brexit was terrible for farmers. There's so many terrible things that have happened to farmers, and I don't think this is really one of them. And the reaction...
Let's move on to another, I guess, headache for the Prime Minister. If we go to The Observer on the front page, Britain must choose trade with the EU over Trump, because, of course, the government has also been saying that it's all about growth. And, I mean, they could have predicted there might be a Trump presidency, but, maybe they were hoping there wouldn't be, but there is one now. And now this comes after a comment by a Trump supporter that was encouraging the UK to basically ditch the EU because of its socialist model. And this is a similar story, Amy.
But the problem is that with Trump, he's been very explicit about America first, and he's not going to go back on that, however many dinners he goes out with Nigel Farage to. They want to put 20% tariffs on UK trade. At the same time, we are still neglecting our neighbour, the EU. And so when growth is so stubborn, when it's lower than expected, the cost of living is as high as it is, and it's estimated that Brexit is costing every household per year £1,000, it just seems like common sense to get closer again to the EU rather than Trump. So I can see... So this is words of the former
former head of the World Trade Organization.
Saying, choose... If we're going to choose between the EU and Trump, choose the EU. And I think that makes perfect sense.
What a surprise that he would actually say that. He's echoing actually something that Donald Trump's economic advisor had actually said, which was, you've basically got to choose. And the problem is the Labour government probably won't choose, or they're probably not going to be happy at making a choice at all, so they'll try and fudge it. But when you look at some of the very anti-business policies that came out of the budget, you could argue that Starmer's government isn't necessarily pro-business in quite the way that Trump is. And since 2019, the US economy has grown by 11%, whereas the French economy has only grown by 4%, and the German economy can't even get to 0.5%. So they might be our closest neighbour geographically, but in terms of trade and in terms of wanting an attractive market, yes, Trump's going to put tariffs on China, but is he really going to necessarily put tariffs on the UK? Let's see.
Let's see.
Well, definitely one of the question marks there. Let's go to the Sunday Telegraph, which is, it has another repercussion of the Trump election for Ukraine. Obviously, we know that Donald Trump said he would end the war in a day. And now we kind of see perhaps President Zelensky becoming a bit pragmatic about his relationship with Donald Trump. Amy?
Yeah, well, I think you've got the word exactly right, pragmatic. So Zelensky has said that Donald Trump will hasten the end of the war. Quite how, he hasn't been... I don't think it's exactly the way that Zelensky would have hoped, but I'm sure since Donald Trump was elected, Zelensky's been crossing all his fingers and his toes because he really needs that US support. And I think that Ukraine is depending on US assistance. So this is perhaps a bit of political manoeuvring, to say the least, from Zelensky. So hopefully that we'll see the continued support from the US.
Lucy, forgive me.
But I don't know about that.
Well, we'll see.
Well, I think Zelensky sees which way the wind is blowing. Olaf Scholz had a phone call with Vladimir Putin. That really did freak Zelensky out. And I think you have to be pragmatic. There are other stories in the papers where he's perhaps pivoting to putting some messaging out to people in Ukraine to be resilient, because what's going to come up is a more diplomatic solution rather than a land grab.
Amy, Lucy, stay with us. Coming up, the Daily Express warns that a Christmas tree shortage and soaring prices are looming due to EU red tape. Stay with us.
United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account.
I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families.
But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before?
yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, writer and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner and broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. OK, let's go straight to the front page of the Mail on Sunday. Linked to the COP summit, COP29 in Azerbaijan, which has had a host of issues around it anyway, but this particular article about the 470 delegates and the cost of that, basically the UK government sending them to Azerbaijan. Lucy.
It's always been like this. I've never understood the whole concept of COP. Always talking about making sure that climate change is put at the front of the agenda, but then everybody flies there. Nobody walks there. Nobody goes by camel or donkey. And what we had was Labour taking 470 delegates to Azerbaijan. And it wasn't even a very significantly populated conference because, as you on Sky News have been showing, there's been another conference taking place, which is the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference in Lima in Peru. That's where everybody is. That's where China has unveiled its 1.3 billion port that it's building in Peru. That's where the president of Japan and Canada have gone to. So why is Keir Starmer going to Azerbaijan? He just wants to, it's just a token.
As it happens, we've just had a response from the government on the story, and they say it is in Britain's national self-interest to attend these summits. Any carbon footprint is dwarfed by the carbon prize of delivering our agenda.
If you haven't got the president of China there, I tell you what does dwarf our emissions is a country like China. And if you haven't got China signing up to something like COP, then you may as well not be there.
But Keir Starmer very much has always wanted for the UK to have global leadership of this
this
issue.
was kind of my thought, because when I read 470 delegates, well, you could say, well, that's great, because the larger the summit, the more seriously we're taking the problem. You could look at it like that.
But if they were taking it seriously, all of these leaders would be
talking about
going.
climate change. No, I agree, and I think COP really peaked around Paris, and it's kind of been trying to get back to that level of relevance.
And that was 2015.
And Donald Trump wants to back out of that. And in fairness, this, I mean, it has been said by leaders that it's no longer fit for purpose.
I just think it makes the people who go there feel better about themselves, and I just think it should be scrapped entirely.
OK. Let's go to Christmas trees now, which you think,
Another
lovely,
jolly
a nice story. But no. So here we go, Sunday Express. EU red tape threat to Christmas trees.
The EU is the Grinch in this story.
Well, I suppose we'll still get Christmas trees, but I think there'll be fewer because of red tape, and up to a 20% increase.
Yeah, 20% increase, just like absolutely everything else, isn't it? We can't really get them very easily. They're more expensive. There's more red tape, imports and prices.
Well, the problem is we don't grow enough of them ourselves. And I think they come from Denmark or somewhere. That actually, that's part of the problem, is that it's taking longer to get there because of the red tape. And as a result,
actually, more people could have artificial trees, which will definitely not please the 470 delegates at COP.
Very 1970s.
Well, it might please them because you just buy the one and then you keep it.
Yeah, if you keep it.
Or you can have that scheme where you sort of get the same tree and then it gets replanted. You can only keep it at home for 3 weeks.
Not very many people have a garden big enough for that.
No. They take away the tree and then replant it themselves, and you get the same tree. Not the cheapest method. When I looked into it,
that is probably the exact type of thing they're talking about at COP.
Possibly, but of the 8 million festive trees bought annually by us in the UK, 3 million come from outside of Britain. So, so anyone
Maybe it's time to share a tree. Maybe that is the way forward.
Tree sharing.
Tree sharing.
Not just hugging,
interesting.
but
Christmas Day, who gets it on the key dates.
It's like a divorced family. Who gets the tree on the day?
Brings the neighbourhood together. Anyway, Amy, Lucy, thank you so much for having gone through the papers with us. Now let's take a quick look at the weather. And we'll all see colder conditions over the coming days, but it'll be midweek before the cold air finally reaches southern counties. Early yellow warnings for snow and ice have been issued for much of Scotland and northern England, but these are likely to be subject to adjustment or escalation. Clear skies in the north and northeast will lead to a widespread frost where rural temperatures are likely to dip below zero. Elsewhere, there'll be more in the way of cloud with some patchy rain over Northern Ireland, Wales and northwestern England. Showers over Scotland will be wintry over the higher ground. Now for Sunday, it'll be bright and cold in the north and northeast. Showers in the northwest will continue to be wintry. Showery rain over Northern Ireland will feed into northwestern England and parts of Wales. Further south, it will be largely dry with large amounts of cloud and a few brighter spells. Temperatures will range from 5 or 6 Celsius in the north to 10 or 12 Celsius in the milder south, where the winds will freshen. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Sir Keir Starmer defends the recent budget decisions as farmers start a week of protests against changes to inheritance tax.